Why are the US and Mexico cracking down on aid workers at the border? Authorities have detained hundreds of thousands of migrants, but now humanitarian activists and volunteers are also being criminalized. I'm Femi Oke. You're in the stream.
And I'm Malika Bilal. Today we explore why people providing life-saving help on both sides of the border are risking arrest and legal action. Tweet us your thoughts or leave them in the YouTube chat.
Driving close to a heavily patrolled border, you see several people in need of water and aid. Now, do you help or not? That is the decision that Texas resident Teresa Todd had to make earlier this year. Teresa noticed 3 exhausted young migrants along a highway in West Texas and offered to shelter them in her car. Soon after, she was pulled over by a sheriff's deputy and was later arrested by US Border Patrol. She is currently under investigation for human smuggling.
And people like Teresa are not the only ones facing legal repercussions for their actions. Humanitarian organizations say they are also being penalized. Scott Warren, a volunteer for the charity group No More Deaths, was arrested last year after providing food, water, and shelter to 2 undocumented migrants. He faced 2 counts of harboring and 1 count of conspiracy. On Tuesday, his trial concluded with a hung jury. This is what Warren said after the judge declared a mistrial.
Today, it remains as necessary as ever for local residents and humanitarian aid volunteers to stand in solidarity with migrants and refugees. And we must also stand for our families, friends, and neighbors in the very land itself, most threatened by the militarization of our borderland communities.
Well, to help us discuss this situation at the U.S.-Mexico border in Tucson, Arizona, Reverend John FIFE is the co-founder of No More Deaths.
Also in Tucson, RAFAEL CARRANZA is a reporter covering the border for the Arizona Republic and USA Today. And Nicole Ramos is director of the Border Rights Project at Al Otro Lado, a non-profit organization providing legal services to deportees, migrants and refugees in Tijuana, Mexico. Hello, everybody. Good to have you here. John, for people watching around the world and for people actually north of the border in the US who may not be aware of what is happening to humanitarian aid workers who are helping migrants, who are helping refugees crossing the border, why does Scott Warren's story, why is it so important?
It's critical because this is not just what's happening in the southwest border of the United States. This is what's happening globally. Not only here on the southwest border, but on the southern border of Mexico and the whole way across the nation of Mexico. It's happening in the Mediterranean Sea, where the European Union is criminalizing humanitarian aid workers and ships that are trying to save the lives of migrants and refugees in the Mediterranean Sea. So this is a global matter that demands the attention and the careful ethical analysis of all people of goodwill and compassion.
Scott is part of your organization.
He is.
At the time where he was assisting, offering humanitarian aid, were you aware of the risk? Was he aware of the risk that you could actually face charges and end up in prison?
We've been aware of that risk for a long time. Since the founding of No More Deaths and Samaritans before that, our volunteers have been threatened on a regular basis by Border Patrol agents with criminal charges. And they have even brought those charges to the United States Attorney in the past or even to court. I think over the 15-year span of No More Deaths and Samaritans here on the southwest border, we have had charges filed against us or had to go to court to defend ourselves 37 different times before Scott's case. Right. So we have some experience with the threat of arrest or even prison for providing life-saving humanitarian aid out there in the Sonoran Desert.
So, John, you mentioned 37 different times that you guys have been familiar with these kinds of the risks. I want to give our audience an overview of what this area looks like and why someone might need water. So this is Gal who tweets in, the vast desert of 4 border states equals dry, sandy dirt, often rocky, few roads, rare plant life. It's thorny cactus and bushes. So hot and bright, it can make you dizzy. There are sudden dust storms and quick floods in their seasons. If you're not from here, it looks like the moon. Gal goes on to say, I marvel that Scott Warren's mistrial came down on the hottest day in southern Arizona this year after prolonged mild temperatures. This emphasized the insane cruelty of denying another living being water in the desert. So Rafael, I'll direct this to you because you've been covering this issue for a while now. And of course, as you heard John mention, this isn't the first time, but what makes this case unique?
Well, in years past, when we did have some of these cases that were filed before prosecutors, oftentimes many of those cases were dismissed by a judge. And in at least one instance where it made it to court and the volunteer was convicted, that conviction was overturned by the Court of Appeals. And so what makes this case different is that it comes in kind of as a wave. He's not the only, Scott Warren is not the only No More Deaths volunteer who was prosecuted. Just earlier this year, we had 8 other volunteers who had faced court as well. And 4 of them were convicted and 4 others had pled guilty to civil infractions. So the government has had some success under the Trump administration in prosecuting No More Deaths volunteers. But certainly the case with Scott Warren, since it is a felony trial, had the highest stakes, up to 20 years in federal prison.
Nicole, it may be just because of social media that I'm not seeing any kind border patrollers. I'm only seeing ones who are acting with less than compassion. But can you give us a sense of the way border patrols actually treat people who are crossing the border? Can I generalize? Can you generalize? Or is every patrol very different? Because I'm about to show some video, but I'd like to hear your take on the border patrol.
Well, I would say that Border Patrol, by and large, treats migrants as subhuman. We saw some of the comments that came out in text messages in the trial referring to them as terms that are not used to describe humans. It's a hunting season for them. It's a sport. Otherwise, we wouldn't have video released showing Border Patrol shooting holes in water jugs or trying to destroy other kinds of food supplies. If you view someone as human, you don't take away the very tools that are left out for them to live. And in terms of the asylum seekers that we have serviced, we've heard numerous reports of Border Patrol agents physically pushing asylum seekers back over the border wall, threatening them with tasers, with guns, in order to prevent them from accessing the asylum process and presenting themselves to authorities.
I want to show some video to you, and we're going to roll it right now so you can see it right now. This video comes from No More Deaths, an organisation that John co-founded. And here you can see some supplies that were set out just so that when migrants are crossing the border, they don't dehydrate, they don't die. And now I want you to listen to the Border Patrol.
So you get a good shot. Picking up this trash somebody left on the trail. It's not yours, is it? All you have to do is tell me, is it yours? It's not yours. You're not going to tell me, huh?
John, there's no way that I can say all the Border Patrol behave like this, but this is several instances of you capturing the lack of compassion on camera. I'm also going to note that I saw 2 dates. I saw 2011, 2013, way before this current administration. So this has been going on for a very long time, John. But that Border Patrol, all along the border, how do they behave to the migrants, to the refugees? Are they partly to blame for humanitarian aid workers now being actually facing charges?
What's fundamentally to blame is the whole border enforcement strategy that began in the 1990s, where the Border Patrol said, in order to secure the border, this is our strategy. We're going to seal off the urban areas where everyone had migrated up until that time for generations. And then we're going to push the walls and the enforcement out and the number of Border Patrol agents and technology. And we're going to push it out so that people have to cross through the deadliest areas of the desert. And they said, once we do that, we know what's going to happen. People are going to start to die. In fact, they used the number of deaths increasing dramatically as a benchmark, as a marker for the success of their border enforcement strategy. And then the whole strategy was called prevention through deterrence. We're going to use the deaths of thousands of the poorest of the poor in this hemisphere as a deterrent to other people trying to cross. Now, not only have the international courts, but the United Nations Commission on Human Rights and the High Commission on Refugees said that's a violation of basic human rights and international law. So when you're involved in that kind of border enforcement strategy, and you know that that whole strategy and the success of it is dependent upon an increasing number of deaths in the desert, then it's no accident that humanitarian aid workers get threatened and humanitarian aid is destroyed by the Border Patrol out there in the desert.
You know, Nicole, John explained the context behind this strategy, and we got a comment from someone who says maybe this strategy now, maybe it's hit its breaking point with the American people. So this is a tweet from Emily Galvin Almanza. She says, Scott Warren was on trial for offering food and water to migrants dying in the desert. Many of you were calling for jury nullification. Indeed, this is why we have juries, so that humans can say no when the law is wrong. They said no. So she sent us a video comment explaining some of what this means for the legal aspect of this case, and then what it means for the American people and what their views might look like. Have a listen to what she said.
Juries in the American legal system have the right to refuse to convict people if they feel that the charge is unjust, that the law is wrong, that prosecutors shouldn't be going after, in this case, life-saving humanitarian aid work. Now, jury nullification isn't talked about very much, but it is a unique right that jurors have to shape the system in which they work. It's a unique role that juries play as a check on laws that may be unjust or unfair. So the question here is, were those 8 jurors using the principles of jury nullification to refuse to convict Mr. Warren? And does that mean that U.S. citizens on a broader level are rejecting the entire idea that people should be prosecuted for humanitarian aid work? I think so.
What's your take? Do you think that this is an indication of at least some Americans rejecting this strategy?
Absolutely. And we need not look that far back in history to Martin Luther King, who told us that we have a duty, we have a moral obligation to disobey unjust laws. First, as a former federal defender, I'm puzzled by how the U.S. Attorney's Office could use finite federal resources to prosecute this as a harboring or smuggling, giving humanitarian aid. But assuming that that comports with as the law is to be intended to be applied, I think the fact that we had 8 jurors refuse to convict is a strong indication that the American people are not going to have these acts, have our system be weaponized in our name using our tax dollars against people who are merely trying to save the lives that our government is trying to extinguish.
Rafael, I'm just thinking the pressure is both sides of the border, pressure in the US and also on the Mexico side, and also humanitarian aid workers on the Mexico side are also being arrested. What's the legal ramifications there in Mexico?
Well, I think farther south in the border, it's a more precarious situation for aid workers there because in addition to, the threats from the government, as we saw with 2 activists over the weekend, you're also facing direct threats and violence from the cartel members and organized criminal groups. So that's another element that they are constantly being exposed to. And that has been the case for many years now. But certainly this is a new element now when we had, these 2 individuals in opposite sides of the country. Keep in mind that the 2 organizers, one of them was in the southern Mexican border, and then the other one was in the northern Mexican border with the United States. And so they were both arrested on the same day. But that kind of speaks to some additional challenges that aid workers in general have to face. Now, it's not just from the criminal and organized groups, but also, coming from threats from the government itself, which, as we have seen over many years, also has reacted with relative impunity to many cases of either human rights abuses, and certainly, the deaths of journalists and a lot of other human rights abuses that are going on in relation to migrants in the country.
This is such an interesting debate among our community, and I know it's a broader debate as well. So I want to take you into just a little taste of that. This is Marcus on Twitter, who says, a virtue ethics approach would say that courage, compassion, and solidarity require that we act in such a way that we can do what we can to help. No more and no less. But over on YouTube, we got a comment from George, and he takes a view that a few other members in our community are also taking. He says in this comment live, crossing the border by other than legal means is against the law. So it's against the law to assist. Nicole, walk us through this gray area.
Illegal entry is a federal offense. However, it's a misdemeanor for which you can receive no more than 6 months in prison. But U.S. asylum law, which is federal law, as well as international law, recognizes that asylum seekers, i.e. refugees, are going to sometimes be forced to enter a country through irregular means because they are fleeing persecution. I would also just note that while presenting oneself to a Customs and Border Protection officer at a port of entry is the legal way to apply for asylum, CBP officers have been turning asylum seekers away from the ports of entry by the thousands for several years now. And so in essence, the federal government creates the illegality of which it complains about and then seeks to create inhumane policies to control that illegality. If we could have federal law enforcement that would take their oath seriously and uphold all federal law, including the laws that they don't agree with, such as processing asylum seekers, then we might face less border crossings at irregular points.
I want to bring into the conversation the Vice President Mike Pence. He was speaking a week ago about illegal crossings on the US border. Have a listen to him.
As President Trump has made clear, we have a crisis on our southern border. And last week, the President took decisive action to call on Mexico to do more. In the month of May alone, the American people learned yesterday 144,000 people were apprehended attempting to cross our southern border. The time has come for Mexico to do more to stem the tide of illegal immigrants that are making their way north from Central America through Mexico and coming into our country.
I am unsure where Vice President Pence got his figures from, John, but he's saying 144,000 people crossed into the United States in the month of May. Do you care?
Of course, everyone should care because the vast majority of those people crossed the border in order to turn themselves into Border Patrol and to apply for political asylum. That means they asked to make the case in court that they had every right to be protected under United States refugee law, and to have their cases adjudicated, and in the meantime to be protected in their quest for political asylum. That's the law. And for the Vice President of the United States to call those people illegals is simply, well, it's a misstatement at best. It's a lie, to tell you the truth.
What would you suggest to the current US administration rather than penalizing humanitarian aid workers who are helping people cross the border? What would you suggest that they do to tackle this issue?
Well, the first thing they can't take back, and that is the United States has for a century exploited the people and the nations of Mexico and Central America, not only through economic exploitation of those economies, but also through actual invasion and overthrowing the CIA, overthrowing democratically elected governments, so we could dominate the economy and the political life of those countries. And the fact is that they're devastated as a result of that. And most recently, the United States has a direct role in the market for the drug cartels that are now dominating Mexico and the northern triangle of Central America, and you have to take that into account when you ask the question, why are all those people fleeing from violence and drought and poverty and a century of exploitation of their nation and their economies?
And John, I
so
hear what you're saying.
You have to start there.
Raphael, I could see you trying to jump in there. I want to play a video comment before you do, because it's right in line with what John was saying. This is Ali Gerard. She's a North American campaigner for Amnesty International, and here's her take.
The Trump administration has created a crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. Border residents have stepped up to save the lives of migrants and asylum seekers traveling through the dangerous desert. Those who choose to provide humanitarian aid, like food and water, should not do so at the risk of prosecution, harassment, or intimidation, but instead should be able to do their life-saving and necessary work unhampered.
Raphael, what did you want to add?
Well, I wanted to add that one of the common criticisms that we've heard is that, despite this crackdown in immigration enforcement and all these changes that the Trump administration keeps making to, or attempting to make to asylum and immigration rules, is that they have done very little to discourage people from leaving because they don't address the root causes of the problem. So, in other words, tackling some of the reasons why people are leaving Central America or Southern Mexico, some of these other locations. And it's important to note that, the Trump administration has actually, cut aid to some of these countries because he's unhappy with the situation. But obviously that also results in the situation may possibly aggravating and more people leaving. So, the common criticism we hear, not just from Democrats, but also from other advocates, is that until a solution or until the issue itself is addressed in the home countries where people are fleeing from, then that migration is going to continue, and it's going to continue not just throughout Mexico, but also their attempts, obviously, to reach the United States.
Raphael is one of a number of journalists who've been covering this story. Have a look here on my laptop. I want you to see Ryan Devereaux's work at The Intercept here. He's been covering this story for some time. Just going to scoot up here so you can see the rest of the headline. I'm showing you this because I want to show you Ryan's tweet. He tweeted this out when the news of Scott Warren, who came out and talked about his hung jury. He highlighted the 88 sets of human remains found in the desert since his arrest and spoke of the migrants he was arrested with and how they sadly have not received the same attention and support that he has. Nicole, let's end on that humanitarian angle. This whole show is about humanitarian aid workers, but the humanitarian angle with the migrants who do not get the press and the coverage. What do we need to know about that?
Well, we see thousands of asylum seekers at our clinic every year. Their stories are largely untold. There is a focus now on the criminalization of aid workers, but we have to look at the criminalization of migrants that has been happening for long before this period of criminalization of our work has begun. We first, saw it as we saw increased prosecutions for illegal entry and illegal re-entry, family separation, surveillance of undocumented immigrant rights activists who warned us as an advocacy community that they would be coming for us next, and we didn't listen.
Nicole.
And so it's important for us to pay attention now.
Nicole, thank you for reminding us. Raphael and John, thank you for being part of this program. We're going to end with a view from the community. Malika.
This is Marcus, who says, how can it be that we have policies and laws that put someone like Scott Warren on trial? We should all be more like Scott Warren.
Keep sending us your comments through Twitter, YouTube, and ajstream.com/the stream. Malika and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.